The cowboy's New Year bride arrived broken, but her hidden talent rescued his ranch and won him over. The stagecoach wheels screeched against the frozen ground as it lurched to its final stop at New Year's Station, a lonely depot nestled between towering, snow-draped peaks just outside Willow Creek, Colorado. The year was 1893, and the winter felt harsher than any the locals remembered. Wind knifed across the platform, carrying flakes that sliced sideways and stung the cheeks of anyone brave, or desperate, enough to be outdoors. Eleanor Hayes sat within the dim interior of the coach, fingers white-knuckled around the handle of her carpetbag. She wasn't the last passenger, she had been the only one since the last change of horses 2 towns back. The other travelers, a couple on their way to Denver, an elderly man bound for his daughter's home, had all left earlier, leaving her alone with her thoughts, fears, and the terrible uncertainty of what waited at the end of the journey. The driver opened the door, breath steaming in the cold. "This is your stop, miss," he said gently, though his eyes held the pity he didn't utter. Eleanor stepped down onto the icy platform, boots slipping slightly before she regained balance. She looked smaller than she was, partly from her thin frame, partly from how tightly she held herself as if bracing against a blow. Her coat was simple, worn thin at the elbows, her gloves were patched and the edges frayed. She carried a single bag and a small tin box tucked under her arm. The carpet bag held her clothes. The tin box held her life. Her mother's brooch. A pair of scissors she had used in her sewing and pattern shop back in Chicago. A single letter, creased, sweat-stained, read too many times, from the Colorado matchmaker who had connected her with a rancher named Caleb Morgan. The letter that had brought her here. Eleanor lifted her chin, though the cold burned her lungs with every breath. The wind rushed around her, tugging stray strands of chestnut hair from the bun at the nape of her neck. She still wasn't sure if she was running toward a future, or just running away from her past. A cowboy waiting, but not for the woman he expected. A tall cowboy stood several yards away beside a fenced corral, his hat low, his scarf pulled up to guard against the cold. A pair of horses, 2 sturdy paints hitched to a wagon, stamped in the snow, their breaths puffing out like steam engines. Caleb Morgan watched the stagecoach with a thudding heart he wished he could hide. Truth be told, he had hesitated all morning, saddling and unsaddling the team twice before finally forcing himself to head to the depot. Not because he doubted the mail-order bride agreement, but because he doubted himself. What right did he have bringing a woman to his ranch when everything was falling apart? The storms had ruined half his fences. The herd was smaller than ever. Last season's accounts had been gutted by a thieving foreman. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for a fresh start, for strength he didn't have alone. The matchmaker wrote that Eleanor Hayes was practical, hardworking, familiar with domestic tasks and sewing. A simple, rural woman from the outskirts of Chicago, the letter implied. But the woman who stepped off the stage was not what he expected. She looked fragile. City-born in the tilt of her chin, the cut of her coat, the faint trace of perfume absorbed into fabric. And though she tried to stand tall, her eyes betrayed a sadness so deep Caleb felt it even from a distance. Lord above, she's trembling. Not from the cold alone. He approached slowly so he wouldn't startle her. Snow crunched under his boots. "Miss Hayes?" he asked, voice steady despite the nerves prickling under his coat. She turned toward him and he saw it up close. Eyes rimmed red. Skin pale with exhaustion. A bruise of sleeplessness beneath each lid. But when she met his gaze, something flickered there. Bravery, stubbornness, the kind of strength that didn't shout but refused to break. "Yes," she said. "You must be Mr. Morgan?" Her voice was soft, careful, as if each word had to pass through a filter of doubt before leaving her lips. "I am," Caleb said, removing his hat politely. "Welcome to Colorado." Wind gusted hard, pressing her thin coat against her form. Caleb frowned at the chill in her posture. "Is this everything?" he asked, nodding toward the single bag. "It's all that was worth bringing." Her gaze fell briefly, then lifted again. "I can work hard, Mr. Morgan. I may not look like much, but I promise." He cut in gently. "Eleanor, you don't need to prove yourself to me." Her lips parted in surprise. No man from her old life had ever spoken to her that way. The ride away from yesterday. Caleb offered his hand to help her into the wagon. She hesitated, then placed her small, cold fingers in his large, warm ones. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, neither sure what the future held. Once she was settled beneath a blanket, Caleb climbed in and snapped the reins. The horses started forward, hooves crunching through the deepening snow. The world stretched ahead, vast, wild, untamed. Mountains gleamed like sharpened steel blades under the winter sky. Pines groaned under the weight of frost. A river wound along the valley, its surface glazed with ice. Eleanor watched it all quietly, her breath fogging the air. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Caleb glanced at her sideways. "It grows on you." She swallowed. I hope I can grow here too." He heard the lostness in her tone. Something inside him softened. "You'll have time. And space. I don't intend to rush anything. Marriage isn't an obligation, it's something we'll approach together, slowly." She blinked quickly, hiding the moisture in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." "Caleb," he corrected gently. A faint smile touched her lips. Arriving at Blue Mesa Ranch. The ride took nearly an hour through drifting snow. When the ranch finally came into view, Eleanor's heart both sank and lifted. Sank because the ranch looked worse than she expected. Lifted because something about its ruggedness felt honest, unlike the polished lies of her old life. The barn roof sagged dangerously on one side. The fencing leaned in places, battered by storms. The house was small, built of darkened logs, smoke curling from the chimney. Caleb helped her down, watching her expression carefully. "I said it wasn't perfect." "It's warm," she said. Warm wasn't what most would have chosen as a description. But Eleanor meant it. The place felt lived in, fought for, held together with determination rather than wealth. Inside the house, Caleb had clearly done what he could. Swept floors, patched windows, laid extra quilts on the bed in the spare room. "I'll give you privacy," he said softly. "Supper's simple tonight. Just beef stew. Hope that's all right." "It's more than all right." She set her bag in the room, closed the door, and finally let a tear slip. Not from sadness, but from relief. She wasn't being shouted at. She wasn't being judged. She wasn't being belittled or abandoned. She was being given space to breathe. When she joined Caleb at the table, she noticed the way he studied her, not with disappointment but curiosity. With quiet respect. They ate in companionable silence until he finally asked the question he'd been holding back. "You traveled a long way alone. That takes courage." She looked down at her bowl. "I didn't have courage," she whispered. "I just didn't have anywhere else left to go." Caleb's chest tightened at the truth in her voice. "Well," he said gently, "you have somewhere now. A home she didn't yet believe she deserved. A life she didn't yet realize she could rebuild. A ranch that would soon need her in ways neither of them understood." The next morning dawned pale and cold, a thin wash of light creeping across the valley like the world was deciding whether to wake at all. Eleanor stirred slowly in her small bedroom, breath misting in the frigid air. She tucked the quilt beneath her chin, savoring the warmth for one more moment before gathering courage to rise. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She dressed quickly, pulling on the thickest skirt she owned, a charcoal wool one she had patched a dozen times, and buttoned her worn blouse to her throat. Her shoes, though polished, were clearly made for city sidewalks, not ranch mud or snow. She slipped them on anyway. When she opened her door, she noticed a folded blanket neatly placed on the floor outside her room. Caleb must have left it during the night. She picked it up, touched by the thoughtfulness. In the kitchen, she found him already awake, stoking the stove. His hair was damp, the ends curling where melting snow from his early morning chores had dripped down. He looked rugged, tired, and strong in a way that made something deep inside her rest a little. "Morning, Miss Hayes," Caleb said, voice rumbling low. "It's Eleanor," she corrected shyly. He smiled. "Eleanor then." The warmth in her name startled her. She sat at the table as he ladled out steaming porridge. The bowls were mismatched, one chipped, but everything was clean and carefully arranged. Caleb watched her blow gently on her spoonful. "Hope you slept all right." "I did." She hesitated. "The house is colder than I expected." He nodded ruefully. "A few drafts I haven't gotten to fixing. Winter hit earlier than usual." "It's not a complaint," she said quickly. "It's peaceful." Caleb studied her face, soft yet worn, hopeful yet hiding something broken. He admired her willingness to appreciate what little she'd been given. The truth about Blue Mesa Ranch. After breakfast, Caleb stood and grabbed a heavy coat from a hook by the door. "I need to show you something," he said. "You ought to know what you've come into." She followed him outside, bracing against the morning chill. Frost still clung to the grass, crunching beneath their boots. His horses snorted in the nearby corral, stamping at the cold ground. Caleb gestured toward the wide stretch of land. "This is Blue Mesa Ranch. 50 acres of pasture, another 100 up into the ridges, and a herd that's, well, smaller than it ought to be." Eleanor surveyed the expanse. Snow-covered or not, it was breathtaking, mountains rising like jagged guardians, pine forests whispering in the wind, the land stretching out in rolling waves of white. But she also saw the signs of hardship. The fence line was partially collapsed, boards split and leaning. The barn roof dipped dangerously, as if one heavy snowfall might bring it down entirely. A water trough had cracked along one edge, frozen solid. "It looks like you've been trying to fix everything at once," she murmured. Caleb huffed a humorless laugh. "Been trying to keep the place from falling apart altogether." They walked toward the barn. Inside, the scent of hay mixed with cold, damp air. A few tools hung on pegs, most rusted, some missing handles. Saddles and harnesses lay piled in disorder, leather stiff from lack of conditioning. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "The truth is, the ranch ain't what it used to be. Last year's storms wrecked half the herd. Then Gavin, my foreman, ran off with nearly all the profits from spring cattle drives. Been rebuilding ever since." Eleanor felt a tug of sympathy. "You've been doing everything alone?" Caleb hesitated. "I have 2 hands and not enough hours." "A wife?" He swallowed. "I thought a partner might help rebuild the place little by little." Heat crawled up Eleanor's cheeks. "I will help, Caleb. Truly. I may not know ranch work yet, but I learn quickly." He looked at her with quiet gratitude, but also regret. "I wasn't expecting you to arrive looking so worn down," he said gently. "You deserve a home, Eleanor, not a burden. If this isn't what you want." Her eyes snapped up, fire blazing through the fear. "Don't send me away." Caleb blinked. "No," she continued, voice trembling but fierce. "Please. I've been turned away enough times. I meant what I wrote. I want to build a life out here. Even if it's hard." Caleb's chest tightened, not with pity but with admiration. "You won't be turned away," he said softly. "Not by me." A woman who saw more than she let on. Later, while Caleb repaired a section of fence, Eleanor wandered the barn, taking stock of the tools, supplies, and equipment. She touched each piece of tack, examining the stitching, the weight, the balance. Her eyes narrowed as her fingers grazed a misaligned strap. She noticed things others didn't: the slight unevenness in the saddle cinch, the frayed edges where reins had been overused, the warped wooden yoke that threw off the horse's balance when they pulled loads. A familiar hum of calculation stirred inside her, a sensation she hadn't felt in months, not since she'd been forced to close the small pattern shop where she once worked, designing templates, fittings, and mechanical adjustments. Her talent had always been considered odd in the city. Too precise. Too intense. Her ex-fiancé had mocked her for it, saying she saw the world like a machine rather than a woman. But here, maybe it wasn't useless. Maybe it could matter. She knelt beside a broken harness, running her fingers along the stitching, her mind already tracing out solutions. Stronger loops, cleaner weight distribution, balanced tension. Behind her, Caleb's voice broke through her concentration. "You all right down there?" She nearly jumped. "Oh, yes. Sorry, I was just looking." He stepped closer, hands on his hips. "Most folks don't look at old leather like it's telling them secrets." She blushed. "Habit." Caleb tilted his head, noticing something he hadn't before: how she analyzed instead of simply observing. How she tilted objects, measured angles with her fingers, studied balance and flaws like she had a blueprint in her mind. He didn't comment, but the thought lodged in his mind. Maybe the woman who arrived with nothing carried something after all. Something he didn't yet understand. A quiet supper and a growing hope. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the snow in soft gold, Eleanor had cooked a modest supper: roasted carrots, beans, and leftover beef stew. Caleb washed up in the basin, brushing melted snow from his hair. As they sat together, a comfortable silence settled. "You worked hard today," he said gently. "So did you." He chuckled. "I just hammered wood." "You studied half my barn like it holds the secrets of the universe." Her cheeks warmed. "I see things differently than other people. That ain't a bad thing." She swallowed at his words. No one had ever said that to her before, not without sarcasm or dismissal. Outside the wind howled. Inside the fire crackled. And in that moment, something small but important shifted between them. Comfort. Understanding. Respect. Eleanor sipped her tea and whispered to herself, barely audible, "Maybe I can belong here." Caleb didn't hear the words, but he felt them. And for the first time in a long while, he believed his failing ranch might not be doomed after all. The sun rose slow and reluctant over the valley, its pale winter light slipping between the peaks like liquid gold. The ranch was quieter than it should have been, quiet not with peace but with exhaustion. The fences creaked in the wind, The barn leaned like an old man needing a cane, and the horses stomped with irritation every time their harnesses tugged unevenly. Eleanor had barely slept. Not from fear, though that lingered like a bruise, but from a restless, persistent hum of thought. The barn, the tack, the broken harnesses. She had seen them as clearly in her dreams as if she had held them in her hands. Her mind kept tracing lines, adjusting angles, recalibrating balance. She rose early, dressing before the house even stirred. Her breath plumed in the cold air as she slipped outside. Caleb was already in the corral feeding the horses. His breath fogged around him. Snow dusted his coat, beard, and hat brim, but he moved with practiced confidence, his figure cutting through the morning light like he belonged to this land, as rooted and rugged as the pines. Eleanor watched him for a moment, unseen. She admired the steadiness in his movements, the gentleness he showed the horses, the quiet strength in his shoulders. Part of her wished she were that steady. That sure. Morning, Caleb called suddenly without looking back. She jumped. Good morning. He glanced at her over his shoulder, amusement in his eyes. You're up early. I couldn't sleep. He nodded knowingly. Takes time to settle in. But Eleanor wasn't here to settle. She was here to help, even if she didn't yet know how. Caleb wiped his hands on his coat and nodded toward the house. Breakfast first. Chores after. But Eleanor didn't follow. Her gaze had fixed on the barn door. Drawn to the broken things. Go on ahead, she said softly. I'll join you in a moment. Caleb hesitated. You sure? She nodded. He headed inside and Eleanor waited until the door shut. Then she stepped into the barn. The cold inside felt different, close, almost intimate. Dust motes floated like tiny stars through the beams of light cutting between the wooden slats. Horses rustled in their stalls, warm bodies steaming with breath. Eleanor knelt beside the heap of tack, harnesses, straps, reins, leather pieces piled in neglect. She picked up a harness carefully, running her fingers over the edges. The stitching was uneven, poorly repaired. The loops pulled the wrong direction. Whoever had made adjustments hadn't understood the weight distribution of an active team. The horses must have struggled. Of course they'd struggled. Of course the ranch had. As she handled the leather, her mind shifted into a gear she hadn't felt in so long that she had nearly forgotten the sensation. Numbers and patterns, angles and tension points. Her thoughts rearranged themselves like the careful assembly of a pattern maker drawing diagrams in her head. It wasn't magic. It was clarity. A gift she had always possessed. And no one had ever valued it. She reached for another strap, testing it between her fingers. You poor thing, she whispered to the leather as though it were alive. You're fighting against yourself. Discovered in the act. Caleb returned sooner than she expected. His steps crunched lightly across the barn's packed dirt floor. He paused in the doorway watching her, though she didn't notice. She sat on a low wooden crate, her hair slipping loose from its bun, her sleeves pushed up, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. Her fingers danced over the harness like a pianist interpreting a complex piece. He had never seen anyone handle equipment like that. Not with such precision. Not with such reverence. What are you doing? He asked softly. She startled, dropping a strap. I didn't hear you. Well, now I'm curious. Her cheeks pinked. I was looking at your tack. Some of the stitching is pulling wrong. The loops are off balance. One side is heavier than the other. It's making the horses drag the load unevenly, which means they work harder, lose stamina faster, and... She stopped, flushing scarlet. I'm talking too much. Caleb shook his head slowly. No, you're talking just right. She blinked. Do you know how to fix that? He asked. Eleanor hesitated. This was always the part where people either mocked her or dismissed her. Yes, she admitted quietly. I can fix it, if you'd like. You can fix all this? He gestured to the pile. She swallowed. I believe so. Caleb knelt beside her, picking up a cracked strap she had set aside. Show me. Her breath caught. He wasn't doubting her, he was interested. She reached for the harness. See here? She pointed to a misaligned loop. This pulls the horse's weight off center. It's fighting its own movement. Caleb frowned, then nodded. Makes sense. And here, she said, the leather's uneven. Thinner on this side. It'll snap in a few weeks. He watched her with a growing, quiet awe. How do you see all that? He asked. Her eyes dropped to the leather in her lap. I used to work as a pattern maker. Designing clothing, equipment modifications, detailed work. My mind just sorts things. Sorts things? Breaks them into pieces. rebuilds them, finds what works. Caleb's voice softened. And no one appreciated that where you came from? The question hit her heart like a gentle strike. She swallowed hard. They called it strange. Said I saw the world wrong. Caleb's expression darkened, not at her but at whatever ghosts haunted her. They were wrong, he said firmly. Eleanor's breath trembled. The first repair. Go on, Caleb said. Do what you need to do. So she did. She gathered tools, stitching awl, needles, beeswax, scraps of good leather, and set to work. Her movements were steady, sure. She recut the loops, rewove torn edges, balanced tension and reinforced strain points. Caleb watched, stunned. You're fast, he murmured. And precise, she said softly, not bragging, just stating truth. When she finished, she lifted the harness, inspecting it from all angles. This will work better, she said. Much better. They tested it immediately. Caleb hitched the team to the sled and Eleanor helped adjust the straps. The horses flicked their ears, sensing the difference before moving. When Caleb clicked his tongue, the team surged forward. Smooth, balanced, strong. He blinked in surprise. Well, I'll be. Eleanor stood stiffly beside him, uncertain. That's remarkable, he said. Eleanor, you did that. She looked away, suddenly overwhelmed. It's nothing. It's everything, Caleb corrected. You just saved my horses a whole season of strain. Her eyes welled with emotion she fought to hide. A small miracle and a smaller smile. Caleb turned to her. You may be a miracle, he said quietly. No, she whispered. Just someone who finally found a use. His jaw tightened with a protective instinct he didn't fully understand yet. You have worth, Eleanor. More than you know. She met his eyes, uncertain, hopeful, vulnerable. And for the first time since she stepped onto his land, she let herself smile. A real smile. A small, soft, brave thing. The beginning of everything. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt almost like healing. Eleanor spent hours repairing tack with meticulous care, adjusting harnesses and stitching leather with confidence she hadn't felt since her life fell apart in Chicago. Caleb, though he worked hard from dawn to dusk, found himself drifting into the barn more often than necessary, just to watch her hands move with that strange, beautiful precision. He didn't say it out loud, but her presence settled the ranch like a calming wind. The horses behaved better. The workloads ran smoother. Caleb found himself whistling under his breath, something he hadn't done in years. Still, a ranch in winter never stayed peaceful for long. A shadow riding down the ridge. On a brittle morning, when frost clung to the windows like white lace, Eleanor was in the barn sorting leather scraps when she felt the horses shift uneasily. Their ears pricked. Their bodies stiffened. She looked up. A lone rider approached from the ridge, heavy on his horse, posture too confident, too entitled. Even from a distance, Eleanor sensed something cold in him. Something sharp. Caleb stepped out of the house, wiping his hands on a rag, and immediately stiffened. The rider dismounted with the slow swagger of a man used to taking what he wanted. Jed Lawton. Everyone in Willow Creek knew his name. Rancher. Land-hungry opportunist. Rich enough to swallow smaller spreads whole. Ruthless enough not to care how families suffered because of it. And he had his eyes fixed on Eleanor the moment she stepped out of the barn. Well, I'll be, Jed drawled, removing his hat. Heard talk around town that Caleb Morgan brought himself a mail-order bride. Didn't believe it, till now. Eleanor swallowed hard, instinct urging her to step back. Jed's gaze wasn't kind. It wasn't curious. It was calculating. Possessive. Caleb shifted, subtly placing himself between Eleanor and Jed. What do you want, Lawton? Jed smirked. Just being neighborly. You're not my neighbor. Well, not yet, Jed said, brushing snow from his coat. But with the way your ranch is falling apart, Morgan, I figure it won't be long before you're selling off what's left. And I like to stay ahead of opportunities. Eleanor felt Caleb go rigid beside her. Jed's attention slid past him, settling on her with oily interest. Miss Hayes, is it? Heard you've got a useful talent. Something about being able to fix anything you touch. Eleanor's pulse hammered. She took another step backward. I'm just helping where I can. Jed's smile stretched, thin, predatory. Helping? That what you call it? Because word in town is you're making his equipment run smoother than it ever has. And that kind of skill, well, that's worth money. Caleb bristled. She's not a piece of property, Lawton. Jed scoffed. Never said she was. But everything has value. Some more than others. He tipped his hat toward Eleanor with mock politeness. If you ever decide you want to work somewhere bigger, somewhere with real resources, you come find me. Lawton Ranch always has room for talent. Eleanor's skin crawled. I'm happy where I am, she said quietly. Jed studied her like a man appraising a horse before purchase. We'll see. Caleb stepped closer, his voice dropping into a warning growl. I think it's time you rode out. Jed raised both hands as if Caleb overreacted. No harm meant. Just a friendly visit. But everyone in the valley knew Jed Lawton was never friendly. He mounted his horse, tugged the reins, and paused just long enough to throw Caleb a smirk. Take care of that bride of yours. In times like these, people always go looking for what they can't keep. Then he rode off, snow swirling in his wake. Aftermath of a threat. For a long moment, the ranch was silent except for the wind brushing the pines. Eleanor swallowed hard. He frightened me. Caleb turned toward her immediately. I won't let him bother you. Jed Lawton likes to stir trouble he doesn't intend to finish. He looked at me like. Her voice cracked. Like he owned something that wasn't his, Caleb finished grimly. Eleanor nodded. Caleb exhaled, long and slow. He's been circling this ranch since my father died. Waiting for me to fail. But I'm not selling. Not now. Not ever. Eleanor looked up at him, eyes shining with worry. Is he dangerous? Caleb hesitated, only for a heartbeat. Not in the way you're thinking. But he's powerful. And people like him use power to get what they want. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. Back in Chicago, people used power to take things from me too. Caleb stilled. Slowly he stepped closer. What did they take? She shook her head. Everything that made me feel safe. He didn't push. Didn't pry. Instead, Caleb gently lifted her chin with his fingertips. Careful, slow, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. You're safe here, he said quietly. Safe with me. Her breath trembled. The barn felt smaller, warmer. The space between them thrummed with unspoken emotion. Even if the ranch is falling apart, she whispered. Especially then, he replied. Because I'm not letting anything happen to you. The confession she feared. That night, storms gathered across the ridge. The wind hissed through the cracks of the house, shaking the shutters. Eleanor sat at the table, a single lantern between her and Caleb. He watched her fingers tap against the wood, patterns she didn't realize she made. Something's on your mind, he said. She took a long, shaky breath. Caleb, I didn't come here perfect. I didn't come here whole. I never expected perfect. She stared at her hands. In Chicago, my ex-fiancé, she paused, heart thundering. He mocked my talent. Called me strange. Said I embarrassed him. Said I wasn't worth the trouble. He told people I was broken. Caleb's jaw clenched. Art. He was wrong, he said firmly. She blinked quickly, fighting tears. What if I am broken? You're not. What if I break things? Caleb shook his head slowly, leaning forward. You don't break things, Eleanor. You fix them. I've seen you do it. You fixed my tack. My horses. My faith I could salvage this place. Her breath caught. You're rebuilding this ranch, he said softly. And maybe rebuilding me a little too. Silence thickened, but not the frightening kind. The intimate, fragile kind. Caleb reached across the table, his rough hand covering her trembling one. Eleanor, he said, voice low and steady, you're the strongest soul who's walked onto this land in years. For the first time she believed he meant it. A storm outside, a promise inside. When she finally rose to go to bed, Caleb walked her to the hallway. Lawton won't come back tonight, he said gently. But even if he did, he'd have to go through me first. Eleanor gave him a small, grateful smile. I believe you. He touched his hat brim, a gesture far more tender than formal. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Caleb. As she closed her bedroom door behind her, she leaned against it, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the first flicker of belonging, of hope, of something she never thought she'd feel again, a connection slowly becoming love. Winter came suddenly, harsh, merciless, and without warning. By late afternoon the sky had turned the color of pewter, clouds rolling low and heavy across the mountaintops. Eleanor had just finished re-oiling the leather reins when she stepped outside and inhaled sharply. The wind carried a strange metallic taste, the kind that warned of blizzards. Caleb, carrying buckets of feed toward the corral, looked up at the same moment. You feel it too, he called. Eleanor nodded. The storm wants to break tonight. Caleb shook his head, jaw tight. I was hoping we had more time. His gaze drifted toward the upper pasture, where the younger cattle had been grazing earlier. They'll scatter if the weather shifts fast. I need to bring him down before the ridge turns to ice. He didn't have to say it. That ridge was steep, dangerous, and easy to lose footing on when snow slicked the rock. Eleanor stepped forward. I'll come with you. Caleb shook his head. No. It'll be safer if you stay here. But you can't go alone. He brushed a hand across her shoulder, gentle, protective. I'll be fine. I know those trails better than my own reflection. But Eleanor saw something flicker in his eyes. Worry. Strength. Exhaustion from weeks of hard work. Caleb. He smiled softly, a smile meant to reassure her, though she could see through it. Keep the lanterns burning. I'll be back before dark. He mounted his horse and pointed it toward the ridge. Eleanor felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she watched him ride away into the winds that were growing sharper by the minute. The storm turns violent. By dusk, snow tore sideways across the land in blinding sheets. The sky cracked open with bitter cold, and the wind howled through the ranch like a wild thing. Eleanor moved from window to window, searching for Caleb's silhouette through the white veil outside. Nothing. The lantern flames shook with every gust, flickering against the walls. She tried to distract herself, checked the barn doors, double-latched the chicken coop, banked the fire in the stove, but the uneasiness only grew. When lightning split the sky, illuminating the entire ridge for a brief second, she saw it. A distant shape. A lone horse running riderless through the storm. Her heart stopped. Caleb. The bucket in her hand fell, clattering across the floor. She didn't hesitate. Eleanor braves the storm. Eleanor grabbed Caleb's coat from the peg by the door, the one still carrying the scent of leather and pine, and threw it over her shoulders. She snatched the heaviest lantern she could carry, lit it with fumbling fingers, and stepped out into the raging storm. The wind nearly knocked her backwards. Snow hammered into her face, stealing her breath, but she pushed forward, gripping the lantern with both hands. Caleb, she called, voice lost to the gale. She reached the corral. The horse was pacing inside, Caleb's horse, shaking violently, sides lathered with sweat. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Eleanor pressed her forehead to the animal's neck, whispering softly, calming him with that natural, instinctive gentleness Caleb had praised her for. Take me to him, she murmured. Show me where he fell. She unlatched the gate. The horse hesitated, then nudged her shoulder as if urging her to follow. Together they plunged toward the ridge. The search. The deeper they climbed, the worse the storm became. Snow clung to Eleanor's lashes, turning the world to darkness. Ice crusted her boots, making every step a battle. But she didn't stop. Not when her legs burned. Not when the wind slashed at her skin. Not when fear screamed in her chest. Caleb. Caleb, answer me. A faint sound answered, a muffled groan carried by the storm. Her heart leapt. She quickened her pace, following the horse as he stopped near a cluster of rocks. Eleanor fell to her knees beside a dark shape half buried under snow. Caleb. He lay twisted beneath a fallen branch, his coat torn, his face pale and blood-streaked. Snow coated him like a shroud. Eleanor's breath caught. No. No, 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 Caleb. His eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice. Eleanor? What are you doing out here? She choked on a sob. I came to find you. He tried to move, gasped, and slumped back. Legs stuck and the cold, it's getting. I'm going to get you out, she said fiercely. He gave a bitter, pained laugh. Branch weighs more than both of us. You forget, she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. I fix things, remember? Her hidden talent saves him. Eleanor examined the fallen branch, thick, tangled in roots and ice, impossible to lift with brute strength. But she didn't need brute strength. She needed leverage. Her mind sharpened, seeing angles, weight distribution, friction, like the world slowed into pieces she could understand. She rummaged through the saddlebags, finding a coil of rope and a broken fence rail. In seconds she crafted a makeshift lever, positioning the rail under the branch and tying the rope to the nearest boulder for tension. Eleanor, Caleb murmured, drifting in and out. You don't have to do this. She set her jaw. I'm not losing you. Not tonight. Not ever. With one deep breath, she pulled the rope with all her strength. The branch shifted. She pulled again, body shaking, fingers raw from the cold. The branch rose, an inch, then two, just enough for Caleb to drag his leg free. When it finally rolled aside, Eleanor collapsed forward, gasping. But Caleb was free. She gathered him in her arms, wrapping his coat tighter around him. You saved me, he whispered, voice barely audible. She pressed her forehead to his. I wasn't going to leave you out here. The long walk home. It took everything she had to get him onto the horse. Caleb's consciousness flickered in and out, his head resting against her shoulder as she held the reins with numb fingers. "Stay with me," she pleaded again and again. "Caleb, don't you dare fall asleep." The horse carried them slowly down the ridge, wind slashing at them on all sides. Eleanor shielded Caleb's chest with her own body, taking the brunt of the storm. When the ranch house finally came into view, a glowing light through the white darkness, her knees buckled with relief. She saves more than his body. By the time she dragged Caleb inside and lowered him near the fire, she was trembling uncontrollably. She tore blankets from the shelf, wrapping them around him, rubbing warmth into his arms. Caleb winced as feeling returned to his limbs. "You came for me," he whispered. Eleanor sank beside him, tears streaming freely now that fear had loosened its grip. "I thought I lost you." "You didn't," he murmured, reaching weakly for her hand. "You were the light in the storm." Eleanor clasped his fingers tightly. "I wasn't going to let the new year start without you." A faint smile pulled at his lips. "Eleanor, you saved my life." "No," she whispered, emotion thickening her voice. "I saved the man who saved me first." Their foreheads touched, softly, naturally, as if the storm had pushed them into the truth they were both afraid to say. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, a new bond forged itself with quiet certainty. The kind that didn't break. The kind that felt a lot like the beginning of love. Caleb didn't remember much of the night Eleanor dragged him home. Pain blurred everything, except the sound of her voice. Her voice anchored him. When he awoke the next morning, the storm had settled into a gentle whisper outside. Snow blanketed the ranch in flawless white, but inside the house warmth glowed from the hearth. Eleanor sat beside him, half asleep in a wooden chair, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was loose, tumbling down in soft waves. She hadn't meant to fall asleep, Caleb could tell, but exhaustion had finally won. He smiled weakly. She had saved his life. His heart no longer beat alone in the world. It beat because she reached into a storm and pulled him from death. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his hand and brushed a lock of hair from her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open. "Caleb." Her voice was rough from worry and lack of sleep. He swallowed, his throat tight. You were here all night?" "I wasn't leaving you," she whispered. Heat spread through his chest, deeper than any fever. Eleanor Hayes wasn't just a mail-order bride. She was the miracle he didn't know he was waiting for. A tender morning. Eleanor helped him sit up, propping pillows behind his back. "You're lucky your leg isn't broken," she said. "You strained it badly, but you'll heal." "Looks like you really can fix everything," he teased softly. Color warmed her cheeks. "Not everything. You fixed me." She looked away, but he caught the slight tremble of her lips, the kind that came before a smile or a sob. He reached for her hand. "Eleanor, I mean it." Her fingers curled around his, hesitant but warm. The kitchen was quiet. The world outside muted. The moment felt suspended, pure and fragile. "You're the strongest man I know," she whispered. "And you're the bravest woman," he answered. Their hands stayed joined for a long time, neither letting go. Her secret talent revealed fully. When Caleb dozed again, Eleanor slipped into the barn to check the repairs she'd been working on before the storm. She inspected the sled runners, tightened bolts on the wagon, and examined the damaged tack she had dragged in last week. But something strange happened. As she touched each broken piece, her mind sparked, sharp, precise, as if she could see the internal structure of the object, the fault lines, the pressure points. Not just mechanical understanding. Pattern recognition. Intuition. Her fingers traced wood grain, calculating weight distribution, imagining improved designs without even meaning to. She moved methodically, almost entranced. Before she knew it, she had repaired 3 harnesses, reinforced a cracked beam, and crafted a new buckle using spare scraps. She stood back, breathless. "I didn't lose it," she whispered. The thing he said was useless, wasn't. Her ex-fiancé's insults felt far away now, blurred, irrelevant. Caleb saw her talent. Caleb valued it. And that meant she could start valuing herself again. A visitor returns, this time with greater danger. Eleanor stepped out of the barn just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the entire ranch in gold. Snow shimmered like scattered diamonds. For the first time in a long time she felt proud, safe, hopeful. Until she heard hoofbeats. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Her heart sank. Jed Lawton rode into the clearing, dressed in a thick wolf fur coat, posture arrogant as ever. His eyes swept the ranch, then landed on her with an unwelcome glint. Well, he drawled. Look who survived the storm. Shame your man took a fall. Heard about that in town. Her stomach tightened. Already? Word traveled fast in small communities, especially when vultures like Jed were waiting to strike. Eleanor stepped backward, her pulse picking up. What do you want? Jed tilted his head, feigning innocence. Just checking on a neighbor. I heard Caleb's hurt. That makes the ranch vulnerable. Her jaw clenched. This ranch is not vulnerable. Jed's smile widened. Without him? Oh, sweetheart, it absolutely is. She swallowed hard. And that means opportunity. For you, she said bitterly. For both of us, he corrected, touching the brim of his hat in a mock gentleman gesture. You got talent. Real talent. A knack for fixing things. And I pay better than Caleb ever could. She stiffened. I'm not for hire. You sure about that? He said, leaning close, voice dropping. A woman like you? You could have luxury, warmth, power. Not this broken-down spread clinging to life. Eleanor met his gaze, steady and fearless. This broken-down spread saved my life. And the man who owns it? I'd do anything for him. Jed's expression darkened. So you're loyal. That's cute. Won't matter much when this ranch collapses in on itself. It won't collapse, she said firmly. I won't let it. Jed paused, studying her. Then he laughed low and cold. Oh, I see now. See what? You're the reason Caleb's still standing. You're the glue holding this place together. Maybe even the reason he's not selling. He leaned in, voice dropping to a threat-coated whisper. And I don't like things I can't control, Eleanor. You remember that. Before she could respond, he tugged his reins and galloped off, snow kicking up in his wake, leaving cold fear curling in her stomach. The confession begins. Eleanor stormed back into the house, cheeks flushed from anger and the cold. Caleb looked up from the bed when the door opened. Eleanor? What's wrong? She hurried to him, breath uneven. Jed Lawton came. Caleb's expression hardened instantly. What did he say? He knows you're injured. He thinks the ranch is weak. Her voice shook and Caleb reached for her hand. Eleanor, look at me. She looked. His eyes, warm, steady, determined, anchored her the way her voice anchored him during the storm. He threatened you, Caleb said quietly. She hesitated. Yes. Caleb exhaled slowly. He won't touch you. Not while I'm breathing. Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, wrestling with emotion. Fear, relief, anger, and something deeper. Caleb, she whispered, he said I'm the reason you won't sell. That I'm the one holding everything together. Caleb gave a faint, pained smile. He's not wrong. Her breath caught. What? You walked onto this land and gave it life again, he said. You gave me life again. Her throat tightened as emotions crashed over her all at once. Vulnerability, gratitude, and the breaking realization that she was needed. Wanted. Cherished. Caleb, she leaned closer. I'd do anything to protect this place. And you. He brushed his thumb across her knuckles, slow and tender. And I already know I'd do anything to keep you here. Their eyes locked. The air between them warmed. Her heart raced, not from fear this time but from something that felt dangerously close to love. The promise. Eleanor leaned her forehead to his, gently, just as she had the night she rescued him. Caleb whispered, breath warm against her lips. I'm not giving this ranch up. And I'm not losing you. She closed her eyes. You won't. Outside, the snow glowed blue in the fading light. Inside, two hearts strengthened by storms began stitching themselves together. Neither one had said I love you. Not yet. But the promise lived in every breath between them. New Year's Eve arrived quietly, carried on a soft winter breeze that drifted through Willow Creek like a whispered promise. The storm had passed, leaving the land shining under the morning sun. Snow sparkled across the ranch, blanketing every fence, every tree, every footprint from days before. Inside the house, Caleb sat by the fireplace, his leg wrapped and propped up, recovering slowly but surely. Eleanor hovered nearby, checking the bandages with gentle, capable hands. How's the pain? She asked softly. Better, he admitted. Then he gave her a crooked half-smile. Could be the company. She blushed and looked down, hiding her smile behind a curtain of chestnut curls. He loved when she did that. The ranch felt different now, lighter, warmer. For the first time since his father's death, Caleb felt hope pulsing through the walls of the old homestead. And Eleanor, she was the heart of that hope. But hope has a way of attracting danger. And danger returned before the day was over. Jed returns, and this time he doesn't come alone. The sun was dipping low when the sound of horses thundered up the drive, more than one this time. Eleanor, just stepping out of the barn with a basket of freshly mended tack, froze when she saw them. Jed Lawton. And 3 of his hired hands. 4 men riding toward the ranch with purpose. Her stomach tightened. Caleb hobbled to the doorway, gripping the frame for balance when he saw the group approaching. "Stay inside," he said, voice low and protective. "No," Eleanor whispered fiercely. "I'm not hiding. Not from him." Caleb shot her a look, but she didn't back down. Jed slowed his horse to a halt in front of the house, lips curled in a smirk that made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Well, isn't this cozy?" he drawled. Caleb Morgan and his little bride. Perfect way to end the year. Caleb straightened, ignoring the ache in his leg. "State your business, Lawton." Jed's expression hardened. "Business? My business is land. This land. I've wanted it for years and now you're too injured to work it. You're falling behind, Morgan. This ranch is as good as dead." "It's not dead," Eleanor snapped before Caleb could speak. "You just want it to be." Jed's smirk sharpened. "You should teach your woman to hold her tongue." Caleb stepped forward, rage igniting his eyes. "Don't you talk to her like that." Jed shrugged. "Fine. Then listen instead." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "A claim," he said. "Signed by the county commissioner. I'm buying the grazing rights on the ridge. The land you've been using for your cattle." Caleb's face drained. "That's illegal. That land borders mine. You can't cut me off." "I just did," Jed replied with a cold smile. "And come spring, when your cattle have nowhere to graze, you'll have no choice but to sell me the ranch." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Unless your bride has something worth bargaining for." Eleanor stiffened. "What do you mean?" Jed's gaze slid over her in a way that made Caleb's fists clench. "I want your talent. Come work for me exclusively, leave Caleb, come to my ranch, and I'll return the rights. Nice and simple." Caleb's breath left him like a punch. "Like hell she will." Jed shrugged. "That's up to her." Eleanor felt the wind whip at her hair, the cold biting her cheeks. But the cold inside her chest was worse. "You think I would betray the man who gave me shelter?" she demanded. "You think I'd leave the only place I've belonged in years?" Jed's smirk faltered. Eleanor stepped forward, brave, steady, fierce. "You don't own me," she said. "And you never will." Caleb's chest swelled with a pride so intense it made his eyes burn. Jed's expression twisted. "Then you've made your choice." The standoff. Jed swung down from his horse. His men dismounted behind him. Eleanor instinctively stepped in front of Caleb. Jed looked surprised and then amused. "You protecting him? He can barely stand." "I'm protecting what's mine," she said. Caleb's breath caught. Those words hit him harder than the storm ever had. Jed scoffed. "Move aside. I'm taking what rightfully belongs to." Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. "You'll never step foot on this ranch again." Jed laughed. "Who's going to stop me?" Eleanor didn't blink. "I am." A silence fell. For a moment, Jed actually hesitated. Then Caleb stepped forward, pain shooting up his leg, but he ignored it. "She's not alone," he growled. Jed's eyes narrowed. The tension thickened, a cold string stretched to breaking point. Just as Jed took a step closer, a gun cocked from the tree line. All eyes swung right. Sheriff Turner emerged from the shadows, rifle raised. "Saw the trouble brewing from the road," he said calmly. "And before you ask, I've seen your paperwork, Jed." Commissioner Caldwell confessed it was obtained under coercion. "It's invalid." Jed's face drained. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," the sheriff replied. "And given the threats you've made, I suggest you ride home before I haul you in." Jed cursed under his breath, whipped his reins and glared at Caleb and Eleanor one last time. "This isn't over." Eleanor lifted her chin. "It is for us." Jed snarled, turned his horse and rode off with his men. The sound of hooves faded into the cold evening. And then, at last, silence. A peaceful, miraculous silence. The real confession. Caleb leaned heavily against the porch railing, exhaustion catching up. Eleanor rushed to his side. "You shouldn't have stood," she whispered. He gave a breathless laugh. "Couldn't let you face him alone." "You didn't have to," she said softly. "I did," he answered. "I'll always stand with you, Eleanor." Her heart trembled. She helped him inside, easing him into his chair by the fire. Caleb stared into the flames for a long moment before speaking. "When you walked onto this ranch, I didn't know you'd walk into my heart too." Eleanor froze. Caleb lifted her hand, pressing it against his chest. You saved my ranch. You saved my life. And you saved me. Her eyes filled with tears, slow, warm, unstoppable. I didn't save you, she whispered. We saved each other. He cupped her cheek with trembling fingers. I want you here. Not because you're useful. Not because of some contract. But because... He swallowed hard. Because I love you. The words hit her like sunlight after a long winter. Caleb. He waited, breath held. Eleanor leaned in, eyes shining. I love you too. Their foreheads met, then their lips. The kiss was soft, warm, and full of everything they had endured together. Pain, healing, fear, courage, hope. When they finally pulled apart, the clock struck midnight. New Year's Day. A new beginning. The New Year bride. Caleb held Eleanor's hands in his. Stay, he whispered. Eleanor smiled, glowing in the firelight. I'm already home. Outside, the world was still covered in snow. Inside, two hearts finally thawed, into love, into strength, into a future built together. The Cowboy's New Year bride had arrived broken, but she left the year reborn. And together, they stepped forward into a dawn that belonged to them both.